Welcome back to One Piece Explained. Chapter 1123 sends off the Egghead arc with a pretty big twist that we predicted on this channel a few months ago, and I'll be breaking all of that down, as well as briefly covering the big stuff from 1122 that I missed last week. So if you're interested in all of that, stick around for the next section, or otherwise, feel free to skip ahead. So with that said, let's just get right into it. After a few weeks off, we return to the Ogre Child Yamato's Golden Harvest Circuit pilgrimage cover story with our 11th entry, as we find Yamato, Denjiro, and the Kibi kids setting aside their differences over bowls of Oden, which is of course both Yamato and Oden's favorite food. There's not too much to go into with this cover page, but I do briefly want to talk about last week's cover and chapter as well, since I was unable to break it down, so let's get into that. 1122 featured a cover illustration of Smoker that by now I'm sure many of you already know was an homage to Kohei Horikoshi, the mangaka behind My Hero Academia, as the series came to an end that week. Horikoshi had sent in a fan illustration of Smoker years ago, which was published in Volume 23's Usopp's Gallery section. This coincidence was eventually acknowledged by Oda in Volume 77's SPS as well. Though, that isn't the only mangaka reference in this chapter, as we later see a group of characters with fairly unique designs on the first page, reacting to Vegapunk's message. These are the Endurance Curry Pirates, a crew that was designed by Oda with the help of two other mangaka as part of the Shonen Jump contest, where readers would create their own fictional crews to fight against each other. The Endurance Curry Pirates were actually created by Oda to compete against the winning team, and in the middle here is Hippie, designed by Oda himself. But to the right is a character named Simitarta, designed by Nobuhiro Watsuki, the mangaka behind Rurouni Kenshin, who Oda used to work for as an assistant. To the left is Hiro Gomon and his wooden horse Mokuba, both designed by the Shaman King mangaka Hiroyuki Takei. This is far from the first time that we've had joke characters make their way into the series proper, as we've had with Minatomo and his Wano family, or even Crescent Moon Galley appearing at the Baratier, and it's always fun seeing Easter eggs like this one. Going around the world, we also get a few familiar settings such as this, which given the architecture in the back, seems to resemble the town of Acacia in Dressrosa. A bit later on, we check in at the Marine HQ once again and see Vice Admiral Stainless, who we last saw confronting Buggy after the dissolution of the Warlord system. It seems he's made it out alive after Crocodile came into the fray. We also revisit Sword at the Marine Hospital, where Kobe thinks back to his first meeting with Luffy back in Chapter 2. Now from what I've seen online, I feel like a lot of people have taken Kobe's words in this chapter the wrong way, as it seems like some sudden betrayal of Luffy, but these two characters have always been friends whose dreams were at odds. We've seen throughout the series just how highly Kobe thinks of Luffy, and that's why he's the person he thinks of here first. Kobe knows Luffy is a good person with good intentions, but finding the One Piece leads to a world where pirates can roam free, and it's Kobe's duty to try and stop that. This is not unlike the events of Impel Down, where Luffy's goal was noble in saving Ace, but his actions made the world a more dangerous place by letting dangerous criminals out into the world. Continuing along, we also get a scene of Devin, Augur, and Caribou on their ship. Devin reports back to Blackbeard about their new acquaintance, interestingly via transponder snail. It seemed that all of the transponder snails across the world were relaying Vegapunk's message, which isn't yet over as evidenced by the next few panels. However, it could be the case that this scene is playing out not too long after the end of the broadcast. Blackbeard orders them to bring Caribou to him, which is also of some interest as we recently learned that Blackbeard had not yet returned to Fuloled. Fans have been speculating that he would go on to Wano after receiving Caribou's intel, since that's relatively close by. Blackbeard was last at Winter Island during the previous day, which is the furthest out from Wano, but given that he has not yet returned to Fuloled since, it's possible that he has other plans in mind. With Blackbeard still being in the general area, I have to wonder, maybe he could end up clashing with the Straw Hats in Elbaf soon enough. We'll just have to see. Now, the Elders finally put an end to the message with the transmission transponder snail's shell seemingly blowing up. Emmett recognizes that Luffy is not the same person he had hoped for, despite their similar awakened appearance. We finally get the context for his apology to Joy Boy that we first heard of chapters ago, as he explains that he wanted to make him king. Now, it's not completely clear what this means, but one could guess that the idea was for Joy Boy to become the ruler of the ancient kingdom, or something along those lines. Perhaps it was Emu who prevented Joy Boy from taking the throne over the world. We'll just have to see once again. The biggest part of this chapter is of course the hockey knot, or rope, or bomb, or whatever you want to call it. This was definitely an unexpected development, as many people suspected that we'd have a fairly standard self-destruct sequence for Emmett, so I'm glad Oda went with something a little less obvious. It would seem this knot infused with Joy Boy's hockey is so strong that it can knock out all enemies in the greater surrounding area, and even revert the 5 elders back to their base human forms. Not only that, but it somehow has sent the elders back to Mary Joie, where Marcus Mars has been waiting in frustration. Now there's a ton to break down with this, so let's just start right here. It would seem that the elders can be overwhelmed by immense haki, despite being conquerors haki users themselves. Them being forced back to Mary Joie is a bit curious, as it's not clear if this is a limitation of their own abilities, or if it's some sort of failsafe for their summoning that was done by Saturn, who of note is the only one who has remained on the island after this. Now recall that Saturn is the only one who has been shown capable of this summoning ability, as he summoned himself onto Egghead from the nearby sea, as well as summoned the other elders from Mary Joie to the island. Mars was sent flying far away from the island as well, and presumably has also been summoned back. At the moment, I'm inclined to think that this is a limitation of the summoning ability. Also of note, Emu seems to have felt Joy Boy's haki as well, despite being at Mary Joie. Now surely his haki did not propagate all the way to the other side of the world, which may suggest that Emu felt this through the 5 elders themselves, which may further reinforce the speculation that there is some physical link between them and Emu. We also get our first flashback to the Void Sentry in this chapter, as we get a scene of a silhouetted Joy Boy speaking to Emmett about this haki knot. Now while this specific technique is something fairly new to the series, the concepts behind it are not. We've seen haki being imbued into physical objects as far back as our first introduction to the ability with the Kuja and their armament haki coated arrows. Later on in the series, we would get the realization that Conqueror's haki could also be imbued. While we normally see this in action for short periods of time in the midst of battle, there is some potential precedence for haki staying in an object for prolonged periods. It's been suggested that black blades can be forged by mastering this ability to infuse weapons with haki. Usually swords are only hardened with armament haki while being used, but black blades like Mihawk's Yoru or Ryuma's Shusui maintain this quality indefinitely, and in the latter's case, even after the original owner's death. Imbuing both Conquerors and armament haki indefinitely could be the next logical step for this power system. And also, interestingly enough, we've seen knots of rope storing some sort of force before as well. The wind knot technology from Wideria was able to release large bursts of wind, not unlike what we see here, but with Conqueror's haki instead. Could this all be some sort of lost technology from the Void Sentry? And real quick, it is interesting that this was stored as a rope. Rope is of course a common object across sailing vessels and pirate ships, but I wonder if there's some greater significance to the rope in the logo of One Piece as well. We'll just have to see. Lastly, I suppose I should briefly cover Joy Boy's appearance. Of course, he does resemble Luffy with the straw hat and captain's coat, and some have even speculated that he has a peg leg given this depiction, but I feel like that could easily just be a byproduct of the silhouette. I'm a bit more interested in his size. Scaling in One Piece is often a fool's errand, but it does seem like he is larger than normal humans in relation to Emmett, given this depiction in this chapter and the relative size between Emmett and Luffy in previous ones. Also of note, Emmett is seen wearing clothes here, which he does not have in present day. The final part of this scene that I find interesting is the setting. This area is seemingly full of trees with this rectangular structure that Joy Boy stands upon. It honestly reminds me a lot of the buildings that we saw on Zou, and given the connection between Zunisha and Joy Boy, perhaps there's something more going on. We'll have to see once again. But enough about the last chapter. Now let's talk about 1123, the Void Fortnight. The chapter picks back up right where we left off, with the Thousand Sunnies sailing away beside the giant warrior pirates. It seems all of the Marines' forces were knocked out by the strong burst of Conqueror's haki, including Vice Admirals Dahl and Pomsky, who had initially withstood this in the previous chapter. S-Snake tries to get them back up to pursue the pirates, which makes sense given that their last order from a Vegapunk was York instructing them to kill the Straw Hat group. Now, no one has yet overridden this order, and they were said to not be a threat toward the forces of the world government as well. It is interesting that S-Snake is unaffected by the haki here. It's not totally clear what the reason for this is. The way I see it, there are several options possible, with this perhaps being a strength of her Seraphim and Lunarian physicality, or even being able to withstand the haki thanks to Boa Hancock's bloodline elements, since she is after all a Conqueror's haki user herself. Or it could even just be as simple as certain quote-unquote good characters being unaffected by it due to the plot, since we also find that none of the Straw Hats or Giants were knocked out by it despite being within range. The bearded giant with the spiked horns looks at the aftermath from afar, and this is the same giant that we had seen several chapters prior, with the firearms or cannons in hand. Dory and Brogy praise the haki that was displayed, comparing it to that of Shanks. They also mention how it didn't feel like an antagonistic force, which is something reminiscent of Luffy and the others admiring Shanks' haki toward the end of Wano. And with this, Luffy thanks Emmett for his help, as our heroes finally set off toward Elbaf. The giants in the spread include Oimo and Kashi, as well as a few other familiar faces that we saw in that spread a few chapters ago. I'm hoping we get the names of these guys soon enough. So far we have Bjorn and Sig, but it's not clear who is who. Bonnie is also seen happily resting alongside Kuma in the midst of this montage of the first few Straw Hats. Usopp and Chopper greet Dory and Brogy, making good on Luffy's excitement for them to meet the Giants in the previous chapters. Luffy reverts to his weakened old man form once again, after having used Gear 5th a bit too much. Now, I've spoken about this before, but he does certainly resemble Vegapunk in this state, who he is juxtaposed with across these 2 pages. Speaking of, Sanji checks in on his corpse, who is conveniently placed in a location that casts shadows over his body, and with this, we get quite the flashback. So back in chapter 1116, York had mentioned how nothing made sense. How did Vegapunk know about the stolen Mother Flame while seemingly being genuinely surprised at all of the revelations that came before him throughout the last 2 days? How was he simultaneously aware and unaware of the government's actions and York's machinations? Well, in my breakdown for 1116, I proposed a theory that at the time may have been a bit out there, but it turns out I was pretty spot on, and this doesn't happen that often with my niche ideas, so let's roll the clip. York mentioning that Vegapunk is not great at deception is surely meant to convey that his reactions were genuine. So, what if he knew everything, but then didn't? Now, this may sound a bit like something out of Death Note, but could Vegapunk have learned about York's betrayal and the world government's plans only to concoct a plan of his own, set it into motion, and then make himself forget? The Vegapunks all seemingly sync to Punk records to update their memory state, but what if it were possible to remove something from that system altogether? If you can delete certain bits of information from Punk records, then Vegapunk and the satellites would be none the wiser to York's betrayal, but why would forgetting everything even be necessary? Well, it's possible that his plan required York and the world government to not suspect a single thing. And so if Vegapunk is truly as bad at deception like York said, then this would ensure that they did not catch on to his countermeasures. As it turns out, that's pretty much exactly what happened. Vegapunk uncovered York's plans, set countermeasures into place, and made himself forget everything about it. So let's break down the timeline. Now, of note, the dates and ranges in here were further explained in that 1116 breakdown, so if you're a bit rusty or just want to check out the full explanation for the logic, I recommend checking that out. In that video, we established that at the earliest, the present day is around April 8th. 2 weeks ago, Shaka, Pythagoras, and Stella noticed an abnormality in the power plant. They realized that someone had messed with the numbers as well as falsified things to make it seem like nothing had happened. Shaka also mentions that the Mother Flame is relevant for the Seraphim, but I don't know if this is anything to raise an eye at, since the power plant effectively fuels the whole island's operations, including the development of the Seraphim. Now, 2 weeks ago would put us at around March 25th at the earliest, and for some more context, this is the day after Luffy wakes up after the raid on Onigashima, which is also the day after Green Bull had attacked Wano. Funny enough, Stella suspects the culprit to be Lilith, given her evil disposition, but the 3 Vegapunks decide to investigate who could actually be. They seemingly have the ability to withhold their memories from being uploaded into Punk records, which, as we know, is something they do once a day. A week later, Pythagoras discovers that it was actually York who had been doing all of this. This would bring us to the day before Leloucha was destroyed, as once again confirmed in this chapter. They realized that York had been uploading false memories to Punk records and messing with the transponder snails in the power plant and the surrounding area, snails that we had seen Saturn destroying earlier in this arc. It seems that she also used the Mecha Sea Beasts to deliver the Mother Flame sample and had been using white transponder snails to prevent any interference to her communication with Mary Joie. We first saw these snails used by the Revolutionary Army to protect their calls from being wiretapped, and honestly, we have not really seen them since, having only been mentioned earlier in this arc when Sabo made a call without one. The Vegapunks end up reconstructing the call through their expertise, and we get our first conversation with Mary Joie 3 months ago, as we saw earlier in this arc. Now, the very next day, Vegapunk reports that Leloucha had been destroyed, and it's with this that Vegapunk starts theorizing the world government must be using the Mother Flame to fuel an ancient weapon, and begins to feel the guilt of allowing this to happen. Of note, back in 1116, during the broadcast, Vegapunk mentions how Leloucha was destroyed around 2 weeks after the Mother Flame was stolen, which meant it had to have been taken around March 19th, meaning the other Vegapunks didn't realize until about a week afterwards. They consider confronting York and capturing her, but Stella realizes that it's far too late for anything fruitful to come of that. Their lives, along with the world, are already in danger, so the best they can do is use their capabilities to inform the world of the looming threat. Stella explains how running and resisting would be futile, as they would just be chased down, but does order a boat to prepare the researchers of the island to escape, which we saw earlier in this arc. With this, the 3 pledge their lives to this course of action, prompting them to even consider what death means for a genius who has split his brain across 7 bodies, with an image that harkens back to Mars's observations earlier in this arc. They also mention how they need to protect their artificial island cloud technology, which is highlighted a few times throughout the arc. He talks about how this will be crucial to saving humanity, which actually makes a lot of sense now with the context of the world sinking. We've also seen similar technology in Wadaria, which was said to be an artificial sky island in the V-Ray cards, so there's definitely something interesting afoot. We then learned that the message was recorded 2 days ago, which puts us at the day before the Straw Hats arrived on the island, and of course, after setting up this message, they erased their memories of the last 2 weeks. It seems the memory mass testing lab features technology similar to the lab that we saw during Kuma's flashback, as well as the Paul room, and so, the 3 Vegapunks wake up the next morning ready for the events of the first day on Egghead. We get the quick montage panel of Vegapunk reacting to all of the big events that happened throughout the next day or two, as of course, all of these events did not happen immediately. Also of note, Vegapunk reacts to the arrival of CP6, which is pretty interesting because this is the first time we heard about them in this arc. The last we saw of CP6 was during the train ride to Enies Lobby, where we met its only named agent, Jerry. The call out to CP6 here is not a translation typo and was actually in the original Japanese text, so unless Oda made an error himself, I guess this means that they were on the island after the Straw Hats came. And to clear any confusion, this is not in reference to any of the Cypher Pole agents that were captured by York, as we know that was CP5, 7, and 8. My guess is that the regular agents that arrived alongside CP0 were actually from CP6. Now I know Vegapunk's plan here may be a bit convoluted or harebrained, but you have to realize that he's acting under the assumption that he's going to be killed by the government no matter what. Sure, he could have confronted York as soon as he found out and tried to escape, but he says himself that running away would be futile. York has already told the government about the Mother Flame and his Void Century research, so at this point, nothing he could do would be able to stop them from achieving their goals and killing the scientist. So instead of clinging to his life for a little while longer, he decides to construct a plan that will inform the world of his findings, preventing him from being silenced like the scholars of Ohara were. He wiped his memory to be able to continue acting normally and not jeopardize his plan, as he wouldn't know when exactly the world government would strike. Conveniently, it was that very next day that everything went down. After having his memory wiped and not having the full context for why he needed to die, he started having faith in the Straw Hats' ability to save him, but as we saw in this chapter, he eventually realized what the circumstances were and accepted that there was a greater purpose to his death, as the note had suggested. It's easy to call the plan stupid or nonsensical in hindsight with all of the events laid out for us, but from Vegapunk's perspective at the time, it does make a bit of sense. That said, I don't know that Vegapunk will remain dead for long. There's been some focus on what death even means for a person like Vegapunk, and after all, he did have Sanji and Jinbei go grab some stuff from the Organ Development Lab just before they were set to leave. With the context of him knowing about his demise, it seems like he could have accounted for how he'd be coming back to life. Oh, and I guess we should also briefly mention that this is how Shaka knew he was going to die when he called Dragon during the first day of Egghead, and also why Shaka had expressed interest in the Straw Hats, since he had hoped for them to be the ones to find the One Piece. Now the chapter ends off on a big celebratory shot of Usopp and Luffy being propped up by Dory and Brogy, surrounded by the rest of the giants. You can also spot Chopper climbing up on Brogy's beard. I sure am excited to go into Elbath, but I have to wonder if we're not done with Egghead just yet. There are still some unresolved threads from the world government side, so I wouldn't be surprised to get another chapter or two before we really get into that arc. Now that's about it for everything I wanted to talk about in this video. Let me know what your thoughts are in the comments. As always, I love to hear what you guys think. If you're interested in the rest of my manga breakdowns, you can now find them unlisted in a playlist in the description. That's where they'll be for the time being. Thank you so much for watching, stay safe, and I hope to see you in the next one.